So on today's Lessons in Leadership, we have Alan Smith, Chief Executive of Capital Asset Management. Alan, it's great to have you on the show today.
Pleasure, Paul. It's great to be here.
Alan, I guess first and foremost, I ask everybody this. It would be really good if you could give our listeners and our viewers a quick 2-minute overview of who you are and how you've got to where you are today. I think people are always interested in the career journey and how people have ended up in the positions they are as chief executive.
Yeah, sure. Happy to do that. And this is probably one of your more simpler backstories in that fundamentally, I've only ever had 2 real jobs. Well, 3 if I include my paper round as a teenager. But I'm, as you may detect, I'm Scottish by birth, and I travelled that well-worn path from the north down to the bright lights of London. Immediately after leaving college, and I spent the first 14 years or so of my career working in what is now one of the largest institutional asset management companies in Europe, if not the world. So that was a kind of graduate trainee role, and just, as many people do, sort of slowly but surely work my way up the slippery pole. And really enjoyed it, really enjoyed the process, really enjoyed working in this sort of large institution. Great place to learn. As you can appreciate, these bigger companies have got fantastic training programs, fantastic people development programs and systems. And so I learned an awful lot whilst I was working with them. And again, like others before me, I reached a point where I was either going to carry on forever and probably be institutionalized, and who knows, may even still have been working for them if I wasn't being made redundant or fired by now. But I just had an opportunity that came up for me to walk away from that role and effectively to do what I'm doing now, is to start my own business. And that's what I did. I made that kind of entrepreneurial transition at the time and walked away from what on reflection was quite a brave move, because it was a comfortable employment package at the time. I was well compensated, the traditional bells and whistles of a company car and a pension scheme and a laptop and a credit card and all those sort of things. But I just came to a point where I thought there's going to be a bit more to life than this. And so an opportunity presented itself. And I literally talk about, there was no leadership involved, because I effectively started what would be known as a sole trader, a one-man band. It was myself and a PA secretary, as it was in those days. Just started my own business in a little room above a shop in London's Victoria. And started from there. And the interesting thing is I had no grand ambition. There wasn't a 2-inch thick business plan or anything. I had a kernel of an idea. I thought I'd witnessed a lot, working in financial services, working in retail financial services, so dealing with members of the public, seeing how they were impacted by the decisions that the financial services industry made. And, like many before me, I just thought I could probably do it better.
And how did you find that transition? So this is an interesting part of the conversation that we always speak to with entrepreneurs and people who've started their own business. It's that transition from being a baby to being a sort of teenager, and then to growing up to be a proper business with systems, process, procedure. How have you kind of handled that, and what's been some of the growing pains in the way?
Yes, that's exactly how I think of it. I think the first few years it is just like, and I think of my own children. You're first learning to walk as you're a toddler. You don't really know what on earth you're doing, and bit by bit, then you realise we are growing up. And the way I see it is now, we're that difficult teenager. We're not quite a fully grown adult yet, but we kind of know what we're doing. So, absolutely right. I learned one thing is I'm a voracious reader. I consume a lot of information. I've got a sort of sense of curiosity, which I suspect when I look at some of the leaders that I admire and follow, they all seem to be that similarly inclined in terms of they are permanent learners, consistent readers and consumers of information. So one of the things I picked up earlier on was a book that someone recommended to me. It's well known, but it's called The E-Myth. Michael Gerber, The E-Myth. And I remember reading that on holiday, early days of the business. Well, we were a couple of years in, and we didn't, it was all, talking systems and processes, like a lot of startup entrepreneurs. It's all in my head. I know how everything works here. But God forbid anything happens to me, no one would know anything. So if your audience hasn't come across or read the E-Myth and is interested in entrepreneurship and building businesses, I think that's an absolutely essential book to read, because it really unpacks this whole process of you can be an entrepreneur, which is a business owner, but the vast majority of entrepreneurs historically, whatever they were doing in their job before, they were just carried on. They not so much give themselves a business, but give themselves a job. As I said before, they've got the worst boss in the world. They're working twice as hard as they ever worked before in their previous job, probably for less money than they ever had before. So you wonder what it was all about. One of the key takeaways from that book was the importance of creating systems and processes. And they refer to businesses like the McDonald's restaurant group, and how the average McDonald's franchise on the corner of your high street, generally staffed by half a dozen teenagers or not much more than that, turns over more than the average business in the UK or around the world. And one of the primary reasons for that, really robust structured systems and processes. So we began to adopt those relatively early on, get them in place, and just had this idea of build systems such that the people, such that you could scale and grow into it. You don't have to teach every new, as we begin to hire people and recruit for particular jobs. Because when you're a startup, you do everything. I built this a kind of a human resources map with all the various roles and responsibilities. And of course, my name was in pretty much every single one of those jobs, whether it was doing the day job, marketing, compliance, sales, you name it. And then slowly but surely, you kind of remove your name from some of them and put someone else's name in place. But in order for that to work successfully, you need to have the structures and the processes. So that's actually hard work, and it's not my strong point. I'm not a great person for minutiae and detail. I'm more of a bigger picture person. But that was a process that we had to go through, because if we had the ambition to grow and scale, you need to build your building blocks, build your systems such that the next person come in can sort of pick it up quite quickly, without having to constantly go to the founder of the business and say, how do we do this? Or how do we do that? So that was an important part of that journey. Of course, coming from a larger organization, of course, it's already done for you. You don't actually realize how much is created when you work for a large organization.
Absolutely. And I think it's a really interesting point. And the book you mentioned there, the E-Myth, I read that many years ago myself. And it's one of those that stuck with me. And I was thinking of the baker analogy that he uses when he was speaking there, and the lady he took through the process. Another one which I thought was very good, of a similar nature, was Built to Sell.
Yeah.
Which is essentially the same thing, talking about creating process, system, and procedure, so that you can remove yourself from the business, and at some point you've then got an asset which you can sell at a point in time in the future.
I think it's a good measure of a business to ask yourself, could you go on a 6-month sabbatical? What would happen in your business? To any business owner or any senior executive, if you just either hopefully not forced, but if it's forced or unforced, or you just fancy taking some time off when you could, something, a good few months as opposed to a few weeks, what would happen in the organization? I'm pretty confident in my organization, it would be fine. It would, we wouldn't go out of business. Yes, hopefully I'm here to instill, a bit of forward momentum and energy around the place. But I've absolutely no doubt at all that, I'd come back after 6 months traveling the world or whatever, and we'd still be firmly, operating. And I think that's a key thing.
Absolutely. And this is, it's a common thing that we hear with entrepreneurs and business owners. Again, and that kind of segues nicely, actually, into something which I think is directly relevant to that. And that is, what is your why? You talked there about vision and communicating that vision, but what is your why, and why did you do it, and what drives you, and how does that affect your employees and your clients?
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. It's certainly worth spending a few moments discussing it. When I could think back to my early years, and I'm dropping names of books and so on. I do more than just read books, but the famous one, Start With Why, Simon Sinek books. I read that a number of years ago, and whereas I thought it was quite compelling, I thought it made sense for companies like Apple and so on. I've got this kind of imposter syndrome that exists. I think I hear a lot of entrepreneurs and senior business owners and stuff have this sort of thing. It's almost it's all well and good for Apple to do this, but we're some of the micro business, and perhaps it's my Northern Scottish background that says that's all a little bit fluffy. It's a little bit kind of hugging a tree. Let's talk about our why. So I was never big into that early on. But as time's gone on, it's another sort of outcome, I think, of growing the business, becoming more mature. There has been a time for us to pause and reflect on what it's all about, because there has to be more than just showing up and giving yourself a job and making a profit and so on. So over the last few years, I personally have given it a lot of thought. I've shared it with my team, and we've collaboratively really identified key things like vision and mission. We're very clear what our vision is, what the future vision. We're kind of running 5-year visions. And a vision to me is something almost unattainable. It's some crazy, big, for example, you'll be aware Google's vision when they first started. Google's vision was to organize all the world's information. They've actually probably done that by now. And Microsoft, I think, was to put a PC on every desk in the country, or every family's home, etc. And so, as I say, I'm very much, we're operating in the retail financial services market. I think that the industry I work in could be far better. I think it could deliver better outcomes for customers. I think it thrives on complexity. And I think we could simplify things. I think we could answer bigger questions. So our vision as a business is to transform wealth management. We're going to transform it, which is, again, some crazy big objective that, how on earth do you know when you've even done it? But I think we'll have a good idea when we've impacted it. And we are doing things at the moment. We are impacting a lot of the kind of the conversations that are happening in our space. So that's a sort of a big, hairy, audacious goal, as they say.
And what would you say have been sort of the key leadership lessons you've learned throughout your career?
Okay, I've learned lots of ways how not to do things. I've been down so many, blind alleys and dead ends and so on. And I've learned how not to do things. But I think that, I come back to that, build a vision. You get it out of your head, get it onto a piece of paper or a document or a slide deck or whatever. Be clear about what the vision is, because once you've got the vision, that becomes your North Star, and that helps shape the sort of business that you're going to be. Incidentally, you've got permission to change your vision. So that's in the light of experience, you might pivot, a little bit as time goes on. We have done a bit, because that leads you to the next level of the things that I've learned, which is, it sounds obvious, but it's not as obvious as you think, but hiring what I call A players, recruiting top quality talent. And I don't know where I picked this up, but I read it somewhere ages ago. Got this sort of generic term, A players, B players, C players. An A player would be deemed to be in the top 10% of their, in their role and in their kind of salary band. Whatever position you were hiring for, would you reasonably say that person is in the top 10%? Because the difference between an A player who's absolutely outstanding and a B player who's quite good, and a C player being someone who's kind of mediocre, decent enough, they're good enough to hold the job down, but never going to set the world alight. And I think the difference you can make as an organization, particularly as a smaller firm as we are, a bunch of A players can change the world. And the difference is exponential. It's not because you're going to have to pay more to these people, because you need to respect their qualities and the fact that they are cut above the rest in terms of particular other people who might fill that role. But the difference is, it's not just if you pay 10 or 20% more, they're not 10 or 20% better. They're exponentially better. And I think this idea of an entire team, who every one of them in their role, because each one lifts the other. You know what I mean? And if somebody's falling by the wayside, then others will help them and pick them up. And the team then sets its own standards. You look at some of the best. I'm a big sort of sports analogy person. I love my sport, but you look at some of the best teams in the world, whether it's football, rugby, or anything else. And the best, they've got a world-class player in every single position. There's no weak links, and therefore, if you have that all together, the compounding effect of that is really, really significant. So that was a big lesson that I learned, because without trying to typecast myself as a cheap Scotsman, I would often I'd be driven by the salary that I had to pay somebody, and maybe price myself out of some potential recruits. And I should have wised up, and I should have hired people that actually I couldn't really afford. And I eventually did that. I eventually started hiring people. I thought, I'm not sure if we can meet their compensation expectations. But if you hire the right person, the impact on the bottom line and your revenue over a period of time, quite quickly they're paying for themselves.
I think what you talk about there, hiring the right talent, is it's absolutely the correct way to do it, and then give them the tools to succeed. But it's interesting when I have conversations with clients. Everyone says, "Oh, well, we want to hire A players." But they might, my report back is it might not be an A player now because of the circumstances and the conditions.
Yeah.
But you can make them an A player. What's important is that you get the right skills and knowledge and experience into the team. So it's no point just hiring the best from everywhere else. It's about hiring the best skills, knowledge, and experience for your business. And that can take a C player to an A player.
It potentially can, but my view on that is probably slightly different in that skills and knowledge we can train. There's two parts to our business, and it's left brain and right brain. And left brain is a lot. I mean, we work in a business of precision, of maths, of data, numbers, and so on. So you need to know that stuff. That's kind of almost a hygiene factor. You don't get kind of through the door in certain aspects because you need to know what you're doing professionally. And there's the right brain stuff, which is about, can you build rapport? What are your creative skills? What are your problem solving skills, and so on? And my experience, I mean, I've hired a few people over the years. I've never fallen out with anyone that we've ever worked with, some of whom are not with us anymore, but I've always parted company on good terms because it just might not be in the right organization, and vice versa. But I've certainly hired people in the past that have been super, super competent, super smart, technically gifted. But didn't kind of fit with the culture that we've got here, the spirit of how we're operating. So my ambition is to find people you can tell them that, 5-10 minute phone call, Zoom call, certainly face-to-face conversation, where that person's got the attitude and the kind of the grit, the determination, and just just that kind of. I always think, now that we've been going for a few years, I know what the culture is. Culture is very hard to define. People talk about it. It's a very cliche thing to talk about. But having started this business, I know what our culture is. I know what the capital spirit is, and I know if someone's going to fit in well or whether they're not. And I think we've got the resources here. We've got the kind of tools. We've got our own internal academy. We've got various things. We can train people, but we can't train somebody that just hasn't got the attitude. It's just doesn't really want to be here. And I think I'm a big fan. I mean, we're quite, in some respects, we're quite an outlier in our sector. We're quite contrarian in our approach to traditional wealth management businesses. And I'm sure some people look at stuff that I put out on social media or some of the blogs we write and so on and think, this guy is crackers. And that's probably being polite. But I don't want to please everyone. There's a certain group of people. It's about building a tribe. I want to build a tribe. I want to work with people that broadly think the way I do, but I also want people who are going to challenge the things I think as well. I don't want a bunch of yes people just to also blindly know. So I want someone who's thoughtful, who's reflective, who wants the best. It's a core value for us. Everyone says it. I think we walk the talk. Being client-centric, everything that we do is all around delivering great outcomes for clients. So we do things that aren't necessarily in line with what the traditional providers of wealth management services do. But therefore, if 90% of the potential recruits out there think that we're mad, they would never come and work for us, then great. Because if 10% say, no, it's exactly the sort of organization I'd love to work with. And I must admit, we do have quite a regular supply of people coming to us, knocking our door and say, look, you might not be recruiting now, but if you are, can you just give me a shot? I like what you're talking about. I like your kind of take on the world and your view as a person or as a company. And I think that's what all of us can just, there's enough people out there. We don't want every client in the world. We don't want every employee in the world. But if we get a cohort of people that broadly have got the same mindset as that I've got and that my senior colleagues have got, that the team here has got. And so therefore they're going to fit in. They are going to be challenging. They are going to sort of, push each other's buttons, but fundamentally, the similar sort of people. So I would always want to hire someone like that. I want to hire a top quality person like that. It's got absolutely the right the right attitude, even if they're not. I would hire people, and we have hired people in the past that just they're very early stage career. They don't really know much at all. But I think that's almost, it's not quite, but it's almost a hygiene factor that we can. If they've got the aptitude and the determination, they'll learn the basic stuff. They'll learn the kind of technical and the left brain aspects of the role. That's been my experience anyway the last few years.
And I don't disagree. I think the point I was making is it's what's right for one company might not necessarily be right for another. So there may be a C player somewhere else, but for you, they're an A player because they have the knowledge, skills, and experience, but they fit your culture and they fit the way that you do business. I mean, that's the point I was trying to make. Well, that's melding all that together.
I think that's exactly right. And just to sort of finish up on a point I was saying before, and I haven't, to my recollection, never really fallen out with anyone. There were times that recruiting people, that in itself, I mean, mutually, it's a challenge, particularly over the last 18 months or so. We've recruited people we have now met in real life, but we certainly recruited people the last year or so that we'd never met, and they were sort of brought on board as colleagues that we hadn't ever met in real life. That becomes a challenge. But even in the best of times, a series of interviews and a few sort of aptitude tests or whatever, and then you find out maybe it's mutually not a great fit once you start working together. So I've never been one. There's been times when just things haven't worked out. So you have hopefully everyone is able to have a grown-up conversation and say, if I'm talking about A players and B players and so on, so somebody that I maybe see as a B player would be an absolute A player somewhere else. So it's a question of fitting the right people. And I've had, again, candid conversations with people in the past saying, I think you're great. I just don't think you're great here. And you probably experienced that yourself. And if that person's being honest, is saying, yeah, I think so. I think you've got a good business here, Alan, but it's not quite exactly where I see myself. And I'm quite well networked nowadays. I've certainly in the past, I've helped people, find a role probably with that. I say your career, your future is looking very bright. It just might not be optimized being where we are, because we're quite clear in our future direction of travel. So I've certainly helped people find their future roles, but not necessarily internally at our firm, and invited them to go and connect with one or two other contacts that I've got.
Absolutely. And you only have to look at football and transfers players to see that lived out in multi-million-pound transfer fees that don't necessarily work or go right.
Yeah, exactly. That's a whole other world where you've got to question, loyalty, and when the dreaded money, multi-millions get involved, things it does muddy the waters a bit. But I don't think there's I'm in that kind of mindset there. Again, it might be another symptom of getting older, but life's too short to fall out with people. Every sector is when you sort of drill down, every sector is quite small in a way. And I know that our particular sector, the financial services industry, and I've never really been one to burn bridges. I don't really want to burn any bridges. I don't want to do anyone disservice or do them harm. I don't think it's necessary to do that. I don't have to be everyone's best buddy. I don't think you have to be mean or nasty in any way. I think we can all survive and thrive very well in business by helping people, by helping each other out. And nothing gives me greater pleasure. If somebody just doesn't fit career-wise in our firm for the longer term, nothing gives me greater pleasure than helping them develop their own career, progress their career outside our business. And I've bumped into people years and years later who've gone on to thrive within other businesses, and I've shook their hand and congratulated them. We're all all enjoyed each other's company, so that can work as well.
And one of my questions I was going to ask you today is how do you maintain compassionate leadership when dealing with somebody who's maybe not necessarily performing or the levels aren't quite where you want them to be?
Yeah, well, I guess it's all wrapped up with the same thing, isn't it? I think the starting point. It's an interesting question because there's lots of layers to that question. I think the starting point would be, for me, it's our fault because we've hired wrong. We brought someone into our organization that might not be capable of doing the role that they've been brought on to do. It's the first thing. So we're all about blaming the process, blaming the business, blaming the company, and taking it away from the personality, the people. Something else that I've learned to do a lot. I mean, I used to, people would make mistakes, and in our business, some mistakes can be very costly. If someone makes an error, we always need to make good the error. And I've written out a few big size checks in the past as a result of errors that have been made here internally. Fortunately, we haven't done any for quite a number of years now, but we certainly did in the early days. And I would get quite annoyed with the person for making an error. And then I just came to the realization that no rational person ever shows up at their job to make, to do a cock up, to make an error, to make a costly error. No one does that intentionally. So what is the key learn that we can take? So if someone's made an error, and if they've made several errors, the starting point is how did that happen? What are the learns? What can we do? What can we change about the process to minimize the chances of that happening again? Look, we're all human. You have good days and bad days. So rule number one was just to depersonalize it. Make sure this is nothing to do with the individual, because no one has done this intentionally. We would then look at the process of improving and enhancing things. And if the worst thing is if somebody makes the same error time after time after time, so that then tells me that our ability, that our process still isn't good enough, or our training of that person is suboptimal as well, or ultimately the person's not quite fitted for that particular role. So then we go back to that, and then we're back into that world of, is there a better fit? Is there another role that you might be better placed to do? And the starting point is internally. Is there something else that you could do within the company that you better at? And if not, then how can we navigate our way into finding you a role to develop your career outside of this business? So that's been a kind of a part of my own personal maturity, my own kind of leadership development, in that I've gone from pointing the finger at people when they've made errors to being much more compassionate and try to help and understand that we're all just human beings trying to get along and do our own thing and do our best. And so start with blaming ourselves for maybe not recruiting the right skill sets, and then for maybe not having the right systems and processes. But ultimately, if it's just not a great fit.
And what would you say is the most overrated leadership quality then that people often mention?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it comes. I think what's overrated is this sort of constant, management and constantly, interfering. People talk about, I guide my team, I tell my team, I educate my team, I train them, and so on. I think that can be overwhelming. Sometimes the right people want to be left alone. I mean, what I've been guilty of in the past, I hear that, a trait that's often admired is someone who's a visionary, this big grand word, a visionary and an ideas person. I can tell you that can drive your team, that drives your team nuts. It has in my, because I have no shortage of ideas. And historically, I would come to the team, I've got an idea, but like a lot of kind of founder entrepreneurs, I've got this kind of shiny object syndrome. There's always a new, there's sort of, like the magpie, there's always another shiny object. And I've read another book or been in another course, and we haven't quite finished the last project, and I've got a new one. So the idea that, leaders should be idea generators and constantly coming up with a new thing, a new innovation, a new thing, I think that's overrated. I think you only need one or two good initiatives or objectives, and you need the team. I think what's been proven over the years is the difference between a good company and a really great company is it can be sort of distilled down to a number of things. But one key thing is the ideas to execution ratio. You can have 100 good ideas, none of which ever got executed because it was too overwhelming, too many things to do. Or you can have two decent ideas, both of which were executed properly, professionally, on time and on budget. And that latter organization will achieve far more over its sort of corporate career than the idea generating business. And I think a lot of that comes out of, tech businesses in Silicon Valley and so on, full of creativity, full of ideas. But there's only Apple, there's only Google, there's only certain numbers of them that have absolutely achieved global domination because they've just executed on a small number of regular ideas. So, note to some leaders, calm down on the ideas, focus more on getting your team to execute a few key plans and ideas.
Very much true. I'm thinking of one of my clients in particular there, who's absolutely brilliant. But his team have to take what he says and then make sure they execute on the first thing and tell him that it's not necessarily possible to execute on all of it.
Yeah, I need a strong team, and I've got that now, and I'm very happy that because I can't help myself, but come up with, let's say 10 ideas. But I've got a fantastic team around me and my head of operations here, Shireen, she'll say, right, I've looked at these 10, one's great, and we're going to do that. There's 2 others that are quite good, but we're not going to do them yet. We haven't got the resource or the capacity. The other 6 or 7, we ain't doing. they're not that good. So you need to have that, again, back to that culture and the structure where you're allowed to be candid with each other. And I don't get upset. I say, absolutely fine. That's great. Let's just get that one thing, get it done. And then we'll sort of circle back around and see what impact that's made on the business. So having that, the idea of the concept of being visionary, and that's what I enjoy doing. I like the strategic, I like the big picture. I like the sort of looking kind of over the horizon and see what's coming into our industry. What are the challenges? What are the opportunities? How can we align ourselves and position ourselves for the future? But then have a team around me who've got to execute. So they're the ones who say, I'd love to do them all, but we can't. So what we're going to do is we're going to choose the very best ideas, but we're going to absolutely deliver upon them. So I think, this is where you can't have a group of people, of yes people who just try to do everything, because for the best will in the world, they won't be able to do everything. And you'll end up, which we used to be like, we used to have, of the 10 ideas, we'd have 9 half done, none completed. So that's not the way to progress and move forward as an organization. So yeah, the quality of the team and the kind of the rigorous candor that you can have with each other in a friendly but professional way. Just say, no, that's not going to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. If you were the interviewer, if you were me, what question would you have asked today that I haven't necessarily?
Maybe it's around about what's, as we sort of all progress through our careers, what would we like to be known for? What would we like to be remembered for? What sort of if we were to ask our colleagues so on this idea of looking back on your career, I think that's the thing. While we're sort of doing our day job, I think I don't think about it very often, but every now and again, especially when I'm making big decisions, I think about how will this decision, how will this process, what will this look like 10 years now, 20 years now? What would my colleagues, if they're at home speaking to the other halves or family, what would they say about me, about my role, about what I've done? And it's almost like the eulogy question, but hopefully with avoiding actually having to die. But how would you like to be, remembered? What sort of leadership traits or skills would you like to be known for? I think that's the thing, because we're all just aspiring. We're constantly. I get the sense that regardless of how successful any of these kind of these leaders and CEOs and entrepreneurs, we're never quite sure if we're always doing the right thing. There's plenty of books out there, but there's only, it's kind of a lonely road to be operating on. So what would I think that's a question to ask yourself every now and again. What would you like to be known as, like to be known for? And if someone asked me, and I think I've covered it in many respects, I'd like to be known as a human first, compassionate leader who created a platform and a framework to allow people to fulfill their own potential. I can't make people do anything, but I can create the time and the resources and the space and all that sort of stuff. And I can help them by asking good questions. I can help them uncover. I think the coaching part of the role is really important. I think we've all got the answers deep within us, whatever the question is. We've got the answers, but we need somebody to be able to articulate and ask us the right sort of questions in the right order so that we can voice them aloud. We can begin to articulate what it is we want. So I like to be spending time with my colleagues and asking them some meaningful questions, allowing them to sort of reflect on it and to voice that. And then once I'm clear about what their both personal and professional objectives are, then what I want to do is I want to create that framework that gives them, there's no guarantees in life, but if I can create the framework to give them the best opportunity to fulfill their potential in the time they've got whilst they're working with me or otherwise, then that's a job well done. So that's something I reflect on now and again. What would you like to be known for? And so that's every now and again when I go off track, that drives me back on track. That forms a bit of a North Star. And I say to myself, am I doing things? Am I showing up on a regular basis? and creating that kind of human-first, compassionate leadership platform to allow people to achieve what they really truly desire and truly want in their own lives. So hopefully I am, but I'm only human and I get it wrong from time to time. But we're all still on this journey of learning, which I guess to some extent, Paul, is what this podcast is all about.
Absolutely. Alan, it's been wonderful to have you on the show today. Thank you very much for your time. It's been a pleasure.
It's been my pleasure. Thanks very much for having me as a guest. Cheers.